The lamp is burning low upon my tabletop. The snow is softly falling. The air is still in the silence of my room. I hear your voice softly calling. If I could only have you near to breathe a sigh or two, I would be happy just to hold the hands I love on this winter's night with you.
Hello and welcome to Vibratrek. My name is Sarah. Welcome. You are most welcome to my studio space here in the North Woods of Maine. I'm excited to bring to you another edition of the turning of the year. We'll be experimenting with air dry clay and ink and stamps and also some sculptural elements. I'm looking forward to sharing that tutorial with you. Rob and I did our annual cookie day. I'm going to share some of the highlights from that and also look a little bit at the knitting that's been happening. I am casting on some new projects. I have a finished project to share with you. I'm really looking forward to catching up. I'm so glad you're here. If you are a patron of this podcast, thank you so much for your financial contribution. It is a huge motivator and encouragement. I couldn't do it without you.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll talk a cup of kindness yet for days of old lang syne. And here's a hand, my trusty friend, and here's a hand of thine. We'll talk a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll talk a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne.
Apparently, the best time to decide that you're going to knit for a Christmas present is 2 weeks before the actual gift-giving exchange. I'm not really sure what got into my head, but I decided I was going to knit half mitts for my brother, who attends a lot of hockey practices and games for my nephew, and had requested a pair of half mitts. And I dived back into an oldie but a goodie, which is Favorite Mitts by Robin Hanson. And I have knit these scallopers wristers before on numerous occasions. And I wanted to kind of riff on that and do it all in seed stitch. So I spent some time in the afternoon going through my old bamboo double pointed needles. It felt very old school getting into this project. I'm using some yarn, which is probably a Coopworth from the Shaker Society located in Gray, New Gloucester, Maine, which I probably purchased, 15 years ago. So it was all very nostalgic and back to knitting roots. So I have cast this on and I'm experimenting with my gauge. So wish me luck. I'm not sure they'll both be done for his stocking, but I have high hopes of at least one. And I did actually finish something. I know, it's amazing. This is the Wildwood Shawl by Melody Hoffman, and I am excited to have this off the needles. I enjoyed every minute of knitting this, and the Manchalope by Wool Dreamers, which comes from Manchego sheep, and I did the I-cord bind off in my own Lopi, which I had spun here in Maine from an old sheep who has since passed named Little Pharaoh. And I thought it would be easier on my hands and the process to bind that off in a spun yarn. And I just put it in some cold water and threw it out to block. I didn't pin it or anything, just the natural airiness and weight of the shawl really opened up. It's a keeper. I'm super psyched because, as you can see, the ice has formed on the lake and it's time to snuggle up.
Appalachian sunrise meets my skin. Even with my eyes still closed, I can feel it coming in. Golden, golden, I'll follow only golden, 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 golden things. Mountain laurel high fives for miles in spring. Rainbow trout and a hummingbird wing.
So on this edition, I am just going to feature a quick tutorial on working with air dry clay and making some different types of ornaments. If you are a patron, I am making a bonus video for this month, which will feature this sweet little acorn crofter's garland, and I'm looking forward to putting that up for you. But I really kind of went great guns with this air dry clay theme. I've found a lot of applications for it, and aside from actually having to have a potter studio, this is the next best thing. So it starts with air dry clay, and I am working with both a white and a gray, and the gray dries much lighter than when it comes out of the package. You're going to need something to roll it out with, and I have an acrylic roller. You can use a bottle, a water bottle, whatever's on hand. And then you're going to need something to, if you're going to create an ornament, pierce a hole, do some shaping. I have a variety of inks that I'm using to stamp onto the wet clay. You can also stamp onto the dry clay. And I have found that the gold metallics work really well in adhering to the wet clay. I am using pan pastels in part of the finishing process, and I just picked a variety of colors and different kind of moody winter tones, and we're going to use that to kind of paint over, not paint, but rub over the front of the dried item. And then I have some cedar and I have some hemlock, and I find that pointy, textured, veiny type of fauna works really well, leaving impressions. You can also try stamps, which I did do. I didn't get a great result, and I think that might have to do with this ink that I used. I bought these cookie cutters, so I have a variety of shapes I can cut, which will match the design. And then I also made sure to have wire cutters and a paper clip, as well as some wax linen thread or leather. And this is a way we can create our holders, especially for the sculptural elements that we're going to create. So you can use it to kind of create a little hook, so when that clay dries, it will adhere to the metal. So I have bowls and the mushroom ornament and flat ornaments. So there's different, as I said, applications or items that you can kind of dream up. A notions dish, etc. So obviously you don't have to sculpt mushrooms. You can sculpt whatever you want. These seem the easiest to me. I did use glue. I used super glue to adhere those two pieces together, so that might be something helpful to have on hand, as well as wax paper for your surfaces. And then I also, in the finishing process, like to use a little bit of sandpaper to take off any rough edges. And I'm using a fine grit sandpaper that my husband had left over from a project. So I did that outside too, by the way. I don't think I had any video of that, but I like to be in the open, well-ventilated space. The other part of finishing is paint and a paintbrush. Acrylics work really well. Any shaping that you want to do, little dishes to kind of help create that shape. And when I'm working with this clay, I like to have some water on hand, because that can help keep the consistency and keep it moist, so it's easier to work with. So we're just going to start out like we're working with dough, and basically you want to be rolling that to an even consistency. And I'm working mostly between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch in thickness. This has to dry for 24 to 48 hours depending on the thickness, so that's something to keep in mind. So I just try to keep things thin for the ornaments, and I think right around 1/4 of an inch for the little dishes that I like to make. So again, just rolling this out, I'm using the water to kind of get rid of the cracks and keep a smooth surface. And I like to use that technique of rotating it, which helps to disperse the clay evenly across your work surface. Once you have it rolled out to your thickness, put your impression down that you'd like to make, roll over it, and you can lift it off. This is going to leave a bare impression on this particular example, and you can either leave that as is, or, as I'll show you in the end, we'll work with the pan pastels with this particular piece. So cut it to size, create the hanger. As you know, you could put a piece of metal in, or you can use a hole, and then you can set that aside to dry and re-roll out the clay that you were just working with again. One thing that I do like to do before I finish and set it aside is I take a little bit of water and I just finish the edges and just take that cut edge off. For this particular example, I am stamping the cedar plant first with that gold metallic, and then I'm going to stamp that and create an impression with the color onto the clay. So you can see I am using quite a bit of ink here, but that's mostly because I really wanted it to adhere to the plant surface. So I like to cut my dish a little bit larger than the mold that I'm going to use. And a ramekin or the top of a mason jar is perfect. And I push it in and I round off the edges and smooth them all out. And I let it set for about 24 hours in the mold, and then I pop it out and finish drying it outside the mold so the underneath can get some air circulation. I use my excess for the mushrooms. These are great because there's no kind of perfect shape to the heads and stems, so that works for me. I like to make sure that I leave a divot on the underside for the stem to fit into when I go to glue it. And this is also where I am going to put my holder on. So I'm going to use my wire cutters and the paper clip. You can get about 3 hooks from one paper clip. So I'm sure a pair of utility scissors would work for this as well. And once you snap that off, you place it in the top of whatever form you're going to hang. It could also be a flat ornament, and let it dry. So once it dries within the 24 to 48 hours, as I've said, it will be nice and solid and you can hang it. So finishing is really just about your own kind of creative space. I am using acrylics. I have not tried watercolor, although I've seen that mentioned for the mushrooms. And I'm wondering too if you could paint the plants instead of using ink to make impressions. I like to finish mine off with gold edges. And again, like I said, I have primarily focused on using acrylic paints. And leather ties. I like having different shapes and sizes, and I'm thinking about creating kind of like a mobile kind of look where you're hanging 3 in a row of different shapes. Here's the pan pastels. I am like just rubbing it over like kind of like a etching or a rubbing. And these need to be finished with an acrylic spray. I used a matte acrylic, which I did outside. And they have a gloss and a matte, but matte is my preference. And again, painting my mushroom in the acrylic. I think the watercolor on the gray may not show up as much, but if you're using the white clay, you might have better luck. And I kind of liked the gray. It kind of gave it a little bit more earthy tones, and you know how I feel about gray, so that worked out really well for me. I'm so glad that you've joined me for this second episode of the Turning of the Year. Spending this last month together has been a real invigorating experience. I so appreciate all of your contributions, your comments, and your insights. Thank you for tuning in. Many fond wishes, and I'll see you next time. Bye.